Hey guys, welcome into Play Like a Jet live edition. I'm Luke, this is Clayton, and today we want to jump in and discuss everything NFL free agency. So we'll touch on some of the moves the Jets have made thus far, some of the moves we'd like them to make. We'll take a dive into the AFC East and some of the moves the Bills, Patriots, and Dolphins have made. And then we'll finish by touching on maybe how these moves will affect the Jets and their draft strategy. Clayton, how you going, man? Good to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm doing good. I just got off work. I know it's bright and early for you out and under.
It is. So let's get straight into it, and we'll talk about the Jets and Joe Douglas and how active they were on the first day of free agency legal tampering period. And it started with Jarrad Davis, the linebacker and former first round pick out of Detroit, a 1 year, $5.5 million deal with some incentives to get it up to $7 million. How did you feel about that? What are your thoughts on Jarrad Davis and maybe how he fits in this Robert Saleh scheme?
No, I like it. I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm wearing my Gator shirt right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Big Gator fan. So I was happy to get a Gator in here. Obviously, Douglas has brought a few of them in, but outside of my little bias there, I think he's a good fit. He's an athletic player. Obviously, we know that Salah loves his athletic linebackers. He can fit that Sam position that they're going to need, transitioning from a 3-4 to a 4-3 base defense. We expect CJ Mosley to play the mic if he's still around.
Yeah.
That still remains to be seen. But I mean, the other positions are still wide open. I mean, think about it. And Neville Hewitt's a free agent right now. We have Blake Cashman, but he can't stay on the field, but he'd be a will anyway. So they needed to fill the position. I like the chance they're taking. It's only $7 million when you have the second most cap space. It's really not that much. So I do like the deal.
Yeah, I think one thing that struck me about not just this move, but all the moves we'll touch on that Joe Douglas made were the age and the athletic upside. So 26 years old, going to be 26 when week one rolls around. And then his testing numbers in the combine. And you see that on film, going back and watching some of his tape with Detroit. Sometimes he lost some gap integrity and got a little lost in coverage, but the athleticism jumps off the tape. He was actually extremely good at blitzing in Detroit, which is a little redundant here. Salah likes to use the front four, but you can see that athleticism. And Salah, being a former linebacker coach back to his days in Jacksonville, he should be pretty good at identifying talent. And I'm pretty excited to see the upside of Jarrad Davis in New York. All
Yeah.
right. So after that one, we had possibly the biggest signing, and that was a wide receiver, Corey Davis from the Tennessee Titans, 3 years, $37 million, about 23 or 24 million in guarantees. How did you feel about that move? I know he wasn't talked about that much prior to free agency. There was more talk about Curtis Samuel, Kenny Golladay, whether Allen Robinson would be tagged or not. So were you surprised by the Corey Davis move, and how have you left been feeling about that?
I think I was a little surprised when it first happened, but thinking on it now, it makes a lot more sense. I mean, I think going into this, they needed to get a bigger body receiver on the outside. And we know Corey Davis, he's 6'3, 200 plus pounds. I think like 210, 215, if I'm not mistaken. He's a guy that can make plays after the catch. I mean, I know that one highlight you put out there, like right after he signed. And we know what he can do over the top. He was a top 10 pick for a reason. I think they're taking a good chance on him. But I will say, like, I think it made more sense because when you look at the draft, like landscape at the receiver position, in those round 2, 3, 4 rounds, there's a lot of smaller body receivers. There's not a lot of like big guys like him who can make plays on the outside. Like you got Elijah Moore, Dwayne Eskridge, Kadarius Toney. He's more round 1, round 2, but you got these smaller guys that don't really play the same way that he does, and they're going to need that in this kind of offense. And I do like the signing. It's not a ton of money. He's outside the top 20 at the position. So I like the upside. It's really a 2-year deal if they want it to be, so they're not really locked in. And that's a lot. And I think we're going to see that a lot with Joe Douglas as the GM over these next few years. I don't think he's going to hand out these 4-year, 5-year deals to random free agents unless it's his own guy.
Yeah.
That I could see happening. But outside the organization, I think we're going to see a lot of 2-3 year deals where they're not locking themselves into bad contracts like we have seen in the past.
Yeah, and I think one thing you touched on there, Clay, I love the scheme fit that he came from Arthur Smith in Tennessee. So many of those deep over routes and crosses. a lot of the concepts and things that Corey Davis are great at with his route running and timing, such a huge part of the Shanahan and LaFleur coaching tree. I think he's going to be an excellent fit here. About 12.3 APY, which seems pretty good value to me with the kind of receiver you're getting. And a guy that I've kind of said that I can think he can mirror from a career perspective in New York is Eric Decker. I don't know if he's going to be that number one dominant wide receiver, but he's not being paid to do so either. If he has 6-7 touchdowns and 1,000 receiving yards, that's going to be a huge step forward from what the Jets have had over the last 5 to 10 years. And the third big move I want to touch on was Carl Lawson. So this one was pretty exciting for the fan base. Obviously, we've been starved of edge talent for the last 10 years plus since Abraham was here. And I know people are really excited about Carl Lawson and what he did in 2020 for the Bengals. Was this probably your favorite move from day one of free agency, Clay?
Yeah, I mean, I love the signing so much. I mean, he fits this defense perfectly, and you hit on it. We haven't had anything on the outside since John Abraham, which was 15 years ago.
Yeah,
which is it's crazy. It's been that long, but he's absolutely the most athletic, pure pass rusher that we've had since then. And I mean, I don't want people to just look at the sack numbers. Like, he's never had more than 8.5. Like last year, he had 5.5. But last year was by far his best year. I mean, he had, I believe, like 43 pressures. I'm looking at Pro Football Reference right now. He had 32 quarterback hits.
Yeah, I think it was 64 pressures.
He's getting into the face. And I know some people are going to be like, oh, Leonard Williams always got pressures and he only got 1 sack with the Jets. Yeah. He wasn't that good. Like, it's not the same thing here. Like, I think with him, he's most likely going to line up to Quinn and Williams more often than not. They're going to dominate the left side of the offensive lines.
Yeah. I think that what you said there, rushing from that right defensive end spot, Quinnen obviously rushing predominantly from the 3 tech on that side of the line. It's going to be extremely exciting. He's so powerful. His speed to power conversion is fantastic. It's second to none. His ability to use that long stab inside arm to create leverage and get the tackles off balance. He took Jason Peters to lunch. Like, he stole that guy's lunch money this year in week 3. And I think his upside as a 25-year-old player, he's only going to get better and better in New York. And with JFM and Quinnen Williams and potentially another free agent signing or someone in the draft on the other side, it's a pretty good group up front for New York. So we've touched now, Clay, on who the Jets have signed. Let's take a little dive into the rest of the AFC East. We discussed before we got live that the Dolphins have been pretty steady. They haven't really made any splash moves yet. But let's start in New England, who have made a ton of moves and spent more money than they have in the last 5 years combined. Which moves stood out to you? What did you like? What didn't you like? Run us through a little bit of New England's opening few days of free agency.
I will say I do like that they did sign tight ends, because we know how that offense likes to run. And getting Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, they're 2 very high upside tight ends. Like Jonnu, he never had more than 500 yards, but he's a guy that can block inline. He can get yards after the catch. He can go over the middle. They're really gonna utilize those guys very well, especially if you have Cam Newton at quarterback. Like, obviously, we saw what he did with Greg Olsen. I think those are going to be 2 big signings. I don't like the contracts they're giving out to them, though. Like, I don't know, $25 million a year for their top 2 tight ends is a little rich for me. But, I mean, their offense was boring last year. It was lackluster, and they definitely needed some help, and they got that with those 2. And obviously Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne, who's connected to the Jets for a little bit.
Yeah. I think the thing that pleased me from a Jets fan perspective was the money they threw at Bourne and Aguilar compared to what we got Corey Davis for. I think when you look at the contracts side by side, I know Corey Davis is a 3-year deal, but it's really a glorified 2-year deal. It's similar money to Nelson Aguilar. So that's excellent value. Joe Douglas was patient enough on day one, didn't jump into his moves. And I think that was really good from our perspective. I agree with you that the tight ends are going to be a problem for the Jets. And that's why the linebacking core is going to become even more important. Guys like Quan Alexander are still out there. I know Jayon Brown came off the board about an hour ago, but the Jets need to do some work at linebacker and even strong safety, because there's some really dangerous tight ends in this division, not just in New England, but with guys like Gesicki and Dawson Knox over in Buffalo. I guess the other team we should touch on briefly are the Buffalo Bills. haven't made a ton of moves, mostly focused on their offensive line guys and bringing those guys back and retaining them. Do you think without adding a lot of talent, they're still the heavy favorites in the East in 2021?
I think right now, actually, sorry, before I go to Buffalo, I just
Yeah.
want to hit one more thing on New England.
Go for it.
Signing Matthew Judon too.
Yeah.
I think he's a good player. He fits what they want to do in New England. Like he
Yep.
can play off the ball if they need him to. Hopefully not too much, but he got a lot of money for a guy going into his age 30 season. So I'm curious to see with a defense that's not incredibly talented. I know they're getting some guys back with Dante Hightower, and I'm sure Steph Gilmore is still going to be there. But I'm curious to see if it pans out because he was on a very talented front seven in Baltimore.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping it doesn't really pan out for New England, but we'll see. But yeah, going back to Buffalo, I still do think they are the heavy favorites just because, I mean, we saw the season Josh Allen had. I mean, none of us expected it, but it happened. He was an MVP candidate. I believe he came in second place behind Aaron Rodgers in the voting. So I think that alone makes them the overwhelming favorites because you look at the quarterbacks in the AFC East, we don't know what we have.
Yeah.
The Patriots, right now it's Cam Newton, and Miami, it looks like it's going to be Tua, but you never know with them either. So I think it is them and then everyone else. But I think the gap is slowly closing between the other three teams.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. So we've gone through the AFC East. We've gone through the Jets moves that we've made. Let's touch on some of the position groups we still think have the most value, and then maybe some specific players that Joe Douglas and co could target in the next few days as free agency continues to roll on and the market has slowed a little bit. So, Clay, what are some groups in particular that you still have some meat on the bone, so to speak, and you think there's still value with those position groups in free agency?
I mean, I'm going to point out one guy in particular that I want back. I want Brian Poole.
Mm-hmm.
The way he played for the Jets these last 2 years, both 1-year contracts, he played so well. And I'm not an advocate for PFF, but PFF really likes him too. They believe he's one of the top 5 slot corners in PFF. He's just been so good for what they do. And without having any real cornerbacks on the team, he is a necessity. He really is. And I think he should be one of the first priorities. Outside of that, I mean, obviously offensive line. They need to go after offensive line. There's still names out there like Trey Turner. Gabe Jackson hasn't been released. And I don't really know if he's quite a fit in this offense, but he's a good player, and that's worth a look at least. Outside of them, I mean, I wouldn't mind double dipping at edge rusher. I like getting an Olivier Vernon, a Kerry Hyder. I think just double dipping there, so you don't have to look at the edge class in the draft. I mean, this team still has so many holes that they have to fill. So if you any talent you can get, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think talking about PFF and the cornerback class, something that Mike Renner talked about yesterday was that your place to gain an advantage over the market is with some of the positions that the NFL doesn't value. So that might be safety, that might be slot cornerback. They're not getting the big money. Obviously, Brian Poole is a fantastic player, has been terrific here, and I'd like to see him back too. But even if they don't, a guy like Desmond King has been one of the best slot corners in the NFL when healthy over in LA and San Diego. You've got K'Wan Williams. So I think they're definitely going to address that. And I expect one of those 3 guys to come off the board pretty soon for New York. And while you're touching on interior offensive line help, Adam Schefter just reported that Kyle Long, who just came out of retirement, is signing $5 million deal to go to KC and play with Kansas City. So they've signed a couple of guards, but haven't done anything at tackle yet, which is interesting considering they'll let go of Schwartz and Fisher. So there's a little breaking news as well.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, I know the Chiefs, and just touching on that for a second, obviously they signed Joe Thuney. I mean, this offensive tackle class, like I've been diving deep into that class. Where they're sitting at 31, they're going to get a good player.
Yeah.
Like whether it's Liam Eichenberg or Tevin Jenkins or, I mean, some people might like Sam Cosmi. Yeah, I think Kansas City is going to do just fine, at least filling one of them. And we got to remember they drafted Lucas Niang last year, who they really like.
Correct. All right, interesting. What about the receiver position? Do you think the Jets are done there? They should stand pat and look to add a slot slash gadget guy in the draft? Do they look at a Curtis Samuels and then release Crowder? Which direction would you take with the receiver class in free agency? Are they done there, or is there still another move to make?
In free agency, I mean, I think it just depends on what the market is. And if you can get Curtis Samuel at a good rate, absolutely, I'm all for it. And then because you can use a lot of receivers. You can have Crowder and Samuel in the slot at the same time. You can have Samuel in the backfield if you wanted to. And we know how the backfield looks for the Jets right now. He actually might be the best running back if he was signed this very second. So I would be okay with that. I'd be okay. And if you want to look at, like, I know Marquise Goodwin, he's dealt with some injuries and in the past, but he's from that San Fran offense. Maybe he comes along. He just got released today. So there are some receivers I would take a look at, but it just depends on the market. I would stay away from Juju at this point. I think the only way I would have gone after him is if all the other receivers just said no. I'm like, okay, like Juju, he still is a good player, but it's just that whole TikTok thing with New York. I don't think it's a good match. But yeah, there's a ton of receivers out there in the draft.
Would you touch Will Fuller or contemplate that as a deep threat from the outside?
Honestly, I think I would stay away from Fuller right now. Like, especially with the contract he would bring in. He would definitely bring in more than Aguilar.
Yeah.
So he'd probably bring in around what Corey Davis got, and I just don't know if you need to throw that much money at receiver right now. Especially two outside receivers when we have Denzel Mims already.
Yeah, tend to agree there as well. So let's finish off by touching on the draft class and where the Jets can go, particularly in the first kind of 50 picks, with having either 3 or possibly 4 picks in that range if they trade Sam Darnold. To me, the free agency moves haven't affected where the Jets will go in the draft. I don't think anything has particularly altered it. As you said, if they double dip at edge in the next couple of days, that may take them out of the running for an Ojulari or someone like that at the back end of the first round. But have you seen any changes in the Jets draft strategy? Do you think it will be similar? And what do you think they'll do, particularly at that number 23 selection?
23, I mean, as I mentioned, there's going to be a lot of offensive tackles in that range between 20 and 34. I think they could go there, especially if they see, and I think Elijah Vera Tucker, I don't know if he falls that far, but I see him as a guard. So I think he would be a good fit for the offense. There's also some tackles that could transition to guard, like Tevin Jenkins. Some people see him kicking inside. If Rashawn Slater somehow falls, which I don't think he will, he could be looked to get kicked inside if they want to keep George Fant at right tackle for right now. So I think they can look at offensive line for sure. Edge rusher, I think it's less likely that they go there at 23, but it's still a possibility for sure. I'm definitely not ruling it out. Cornerback, obviously, still a top priority. Like we know that Saleh likes to rush with 4, as you mentioned before, and right now rushing with 4 isn't going to get it done when you have only Bryce Hall out there, and I don't even know who else is on the roster. We got Bless Austin, and do we even have a third corner?
Maybe Guidry, but he's going to play inside, so that's about it.
Yeah. So I mean, they're definitely going to need to look at corner. So if J.C. Horn can fall, I know Scott Mason. That's his guy through and through. I think he would give up the farm to get J.C. Horn right now.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. I think from the moves we've seen in free agency and them not being able to land Joe Tooney, Lindsley, or on the corner market, probably William Jackson is the only guy I would have gone out after on the outside. They've definitely pigeonholed themselves a little into making sure in the top 50 they address guard or tackle to a guard conversion and cornerback. You touched on J.C. Horn. Maybe on the turn of the first round, they look at a guy like Asante Samuel Jr. He isn't the typical body type that Robert Saleh and this scheme likes, as far as he's quite short, but his ability to mirror and match and stay in phase is really impressive. He's going to suit that single high cover 1, cover 3 type defense. So he's probably a name to consider as well. I know some people have talked about Greg Newsome. I think he's a better fit in a cover 2 scheme personally, but he can definitely play here. Definitely has more the size, speed that this system likes, and we've seen over in Seattle and other stops along the way. But I think, guard, tackle, and corner are the most likely options at 23 and 34.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, nothing's off the board for this team yet. As I mentioned before, this team has a ton of holes, and we know. I feel like we know to an extent. Joe Douglas is going to go after talent. and not necessarily a need. So, I mean, we could see a running back go in the first or second round. I don't think he would go that direction, considering the roster, but it is a possibility, and I think nothing is off the board.
Yeah, I agree. So, Clayton, let's wrap up by giving a little prediction. Who do you think is the next domino to fall for the Jets in free agency? Where do you think Joe Douglas goes next with his next signing?
Oh man. And the thing is, there haven't even been any rumors on the Jets right now. They're not really connected. I am gonna say though, I think it's gonna be a nickel, whether it's Brian Poole or K'Waun Williams. I think it's gonna be one of those two.
Yeah, I agree. I have K'Waun Williams on a 2-year deal. That's what I reckon. So we're in agreement there. Clayton, always good to talk to you, man. We have to do this more. Thanks for joining us. Play like a Jet. Make sure you're following Scott Mason at PlayLikeAJet1, checking us out at playlikeajet.com. App coming soon, so stay tuned in that space. Clayton, good to see you, man, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah, you too, man. Take care.